ಈಗ ಯಾವ್ಯಾವ ಅಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಬೈಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಮೂರಲ್ಲ ಮೂರು ಬೈಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಇವತ್ತು ಮಾರ್ಕ್ಸ್ ನಾವು ಬೈಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಸಿಲ್ಲ ನಾನು ರೂಬ್ರಿಕ್ಸ್ ಒಂದು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡ್ತೀನಿ presentation screen
Saujanya, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Fine. So we need to start a new topic today, mailbox. So for that, let me wait for some more time. Let's others also join, then we'll start. Yeah. Fine. So the next topic in operating system module 5 is mailbox. So we have a concept called as mailbox. So this comes under indirect communication. So what is the definition of a mailbox basically? So this mailbox is nothing but a repository or a storage space. Okay, so where we can store the inter-process messages. So this means that any two process, so for example, process P and process Q. So any two process can communicate with each other using the mailbox. Okay, so this mailbox will be acting as a repository. REPOSITORY. Repository simply means that. So this mailbox are nothing but a storage space where we can store the inter-process messages. Okay. So the messages are sent to and received from the mailbox are also called as port, PORTS ports. Okay. So this mailbox will be acting as an intermediate storage space between the process P and process Q. So that so this process P can store the messages in the mailbox, and the process Q can receive the messages stored in the mailbox. Okay. Hence you can notice that so process Q, this process P and process Q, okay, don't communicate with each other directly. Okay, why? Because like in between the process P and the process Q, you have something called as a mailbox. Okay, so this mailbox will be basically acting as a storage space, or more correct technical word is a repository. REPOSITORY. So where we can store the messages of one process, and another process can fetch or remove or read the messages that are stored in the mailbox. Okay, so you can have the official definition. A mailbox is an object into which messages can be placed by the processes. As you can see here, the process P can place or store its messages to be sent to the message queue in the mailbox. Okay. So a mailbox is an object into which messages can be placed by the processes, and from which, understand this, and from which messages can be removed. Okay. So for example, this process P can read the messages or can remove the messages, okay, stored in the mailbox. Okay. So that is sending process can send messages to mailbox, as well as the receive processes can receive or remove the messages from the mailbox. Okay, so for your understanding, a simple post box is being stored here. Okay, say like if a friend wants to communicate with you, means your friend can write a letter and he'll post a letter. So once your friend is able to post your letter, means like using the postman, the postman will deliver your letter like into the post box. Okay, and you can simply pick the letter from your own post box. Okay, as simple as that. Okay, like in a similar way, we have the use of this mailbox, using which any two process, so for example, this process P and process Q can communicate with each other. So any message can, any process can put its message into the mailbox, and any process can receive the messages from the mailbox. So each mailbox has got its own unique identification. Okay. So what is the use of this having a unique identification for each and every mailbox? Okay. So what is the main thing here is so that the sender can know to which mailbox it has to send the messages. So using the unique identification for each and every mailbox, so the sender can have an idea so to which mailbox I'm supposed to send the messages, as well as the receiver can also know from which mailbox the receiver has to get or obtain or receive the messages. Okay, so two processes can communicate only if the process have a shared mailbox. Okay, and according to the example like what you're seeing here, if and only if the mailbox is made shareable, then only the process P and process Q can communicate with each other. That is, two processes can communicate only if and only if the processes have a shared mailbox. Okay. Yeah. So again, some more concept related to mailbox. Like as you know that a mailbox is a repository or a storage space for storing the inter-process messages, and all mailbox have got its own unique name, right? A mailbox may be owned by a process or by the operating system. So the third very important point is a mailbox can be owned by a process or by the operating system. This means what? A mailbox can be created by the process, as well as a mailbox can be also created by the operating system. Okay. Suppose if the mailbox is created by the process, means the process which creates the mailbox will be called as the owner of the mailbox. Means the owner of the mailbox is the actual process that has created it. Okay, so the process which creates the mailbox will be called as the owner of the mailbox, and only the owner process can receive the messages from the mailbox. Okay, so as the process has created the mailbox, and as like it is the owner, hence the owner process can receive the messages from the mailbox. Okay, and so when the process terminates, suppose if the process execution is over or if the process terminates, then the mailbox associated with the process also gets terminated. Okay, like very important point it is. So why? Because the mailbox is being created by the process, right? Or the process is the creator of the mailbox. Hence, upon termination of the process, the mailbox associated with the process also gets terminated. Okay. So any process that knows the name of a mailbox can send a message to it. Okay. So suppose if other than the creator, okay, other than the creator process, if any other process is aware of the name of the mailbox, then those other processes can also send the message to the mailbox. Okay, so thus sender and receiver process use the name of the mailbox. Very important. Okay, so to have the communication between the sender and receiver, okay, so both the sender and receiver processes will be using the name of the mailbox rather than using each other's name. Okay, like in the send and the receive statements. Okay, so you can better understand all these concepts just by seeing this particular figure. Okay, so the heading for this figure is message passing using a mailbox named sample. Okay, so we have the creation of a mailbox, and the mailbox name is being called as a sample. Okay, so we have this process PI and process PJ. Okay, so the name of the mailbox is the sample, as you can see here. So we have a system called as a create mailbox. Okay, so this create underscore mailbox is a system call, and the name of the mailbox is sample. Okay, similarly in the process PJ, so we have a system called as send. Okay, and the mailbox name is mentioned here. Okay, so this process PJ sends the message to the mailbox. Okay, so the process PJ while sending the message to the mailbox, so this same process PJ will be using the mailbox name and not the process ID. Like according to the previous discussion, according to the previous slide. So we saw that the process, the sending process and receiving process will not be using their own names. Instead, the process PJ will be using the mailbox name and not using the process ID to send the messages. Okay. So according to these particular statements, so we have the name of the mailbox as sample. So this sample mailbox is created by the process PI using system call create underscore mailbox. Okay. So the sample is created by the process PI, okay, using the system call create mailbox. So process PJ can send the message to the mailbox using the mailbox name sample. Okay, here it is the same PLE. Instead of using process ID in its send call. Okay, so this corresponds to the indirect naming. Okay, where the process ID is not mentioned. Instead, the mailbox name is being mentioned. Okay, so a message is sent to the sample and is stored in the buffers. Okay, as you can see here, so we have the mailbox so by name sample, and this mailbox by name sample have got so many buffers. Okay, so here we have the owner of the owner of the mailbox by name sample. So where PI process is able to create a mailbox so by name sample, hence process PI is called as the owner of the sample. Okay, yeah. So this kernel will connect or associate a fixed number of buffers. Okay, the kernel or operating system will be able to connect or associate a fixed number of buffers with each and every mailbox, as you can see here. So for a mailbox by name sample, so the OS or the kernel will be able to give or offer some amount of buffers. Okay, so these buffers are able to store the messages sent to the mailbox. Okay, so the mailbox name sample, right, has got 1, 2, 3 number of buffers, where in these buffers you can store the messages sent to the mailbox. Okay, so the kernel will give a fixed set of buffers with each and every mailbox. Okay, and here we have some other process PJ, PK, and PL. Okay, so these process PJ, PK, and PL are nothing but the users of the sample. Okay, right? So this PJ, PK, and PL are the users of the sample mailbox. Okay, that is, they also know the ID of the mailbox. So all the users PJ and PK and PL can use the mailbox. Okay, means so this PJ, PK, and PL can also send messages to the mailbox. Okay, so some other process like PK, PJ, and PL can also send the messages to this mailbox by name sample. Okay, so we have this information so regarding this particular figure. Okay, yeah, right. So the mailbox names may be provided by the kernel or the operating system, or the kernel may allow user processes to create names of their choice. Okay, so the kernel can also offer the names for the mailbox, or the kernel may allow, or the operating system may allow user processes to create the names of their own choice. Okay, so yes, right. Say for example, so we have a small figure here, small explanation. So now we have here the creation of a mailbox, so by name A, and here, so this P1, P2, and P3 are all sharing the same mailbox. Okay, so now suppose the process P1 and P2 and P3 are sharing a common mailbox, right? And if you assume that, suppose if this process P1 sends a message to the mailbox A, so while P2 and P3 are executing a receive call, okay, so from A, okay, so here the message is being sent from the P1 process to the mailbox. And if at a time, so both process P2 and P3 are able to execute a receive call, so then among these two process P2 and P3, which process will receive the message sent by the P1? That will be the question. Okay, how to resolve this conflict? Why? Because so both the process P2 and P3 are executing a receive call. Okay, hence among these two process P2 and P3, so which process will be able to receive the message sent by the P1? This is the question. So the answer depends upon these methods we choose. Okay, so one method is allow a link to be associated with the two processes at most. Okay, so we can have the creation of a link where, say, for a single link, I can have two processes to be connected, so both P2 and P3. Okay, hence using a link to be associated with at most two processes, P2 and P3 can be created. Second option to resolve this problem is allow at most, at the max, one process at a time to execute a receive operation. So you like you cannot expect P2 and P3 so both executing a receive call at the same time. Instead, what we can allow is at the max only one process at a time should be able to execute a receive call so as to receive the messages sent by the process P1 from the mailbox. Okay, and third option is allow the system to select arbitrarily which process will receive the message. Okay, so that arbitrary selection of the process which will be able to receive the message can be done. That is, like either P2 can receive the message or P3 can receive the message, but not both will receive the message. So for this system, what system will do is the system will allow or define some sort of algorithms. Okay, so the system may use some algorithms like so as to select so which process should receive the messages. An example for such algorithms is I can go for use of round robin scheduling. Okay, or any such algorithms can be used so as to select so which process has to receive the messages from the mailbox, okay, sent by the process P1. Okay, yeah. So now coming to the use of a mailbox, okay, and its advantages. Okay, so like we have here, so basically two uses or advantages of the use of mailbox. So one is anonymity of the receiver. Okay, anonymity of the receiver basically means that namelessness or impartial actions of the mailbox. Why? Because a process sending a message to the request a service may have no interest in the identity of the receiver process. Okay, so this mailbox will be freeing the sender process, right? So as to know the identity of the receiver process. Means sender process is only interested in the service offered by the receiver process and not the identity of the receiver process. Okay, and second advantage of use of mailbox is the classification of messages. Okay, so a process may create so many several mailboxes and use each mailbox to receive messages of a particular specific kind. Okay, so we can have the separation of similar kinds of messages, and similar kinds of messages can be stored in different mailboxes. Okay, so we can have easy classification of messages. Why? Because any process may create so many several mailboxes and use each of the mailbox to store some particular kind of messages. Okay, so the namelessness or impartial actions of the mailboxes as well as the easy classification of messages are basically the two advantages of the use of the mailbox. Yeah. So from examination point of view, like they may ask you to explain the creation and the use of mailbox. So for this, you can make use of this particular figure. So where we have the creation of mailbox, so by name sample, and we have the owner as PI, and we have the use of buffers, and we have here like so many other users as well. And along with the supporting statements, you can explain this particular figure. And from the examination point of view, like all these are the related statements with respect to the mailbox. And then so can also explain the advantages of the use of the mailbox. Yeah. So next heading after this is we call it as deadlock. Okay. So we have the concept called as deadlock. So let me start with the definition of deadlock, and then we will see so like day-to-day example. Okay, a simple analogy of a road traffic deadlock situation. Okay, so by understanding this simple example, okay, like then we'll see the deadlock mechanism and how deadlock occurs, how to prevent, okay, how to avoid deadlocks, and how to overcome from the deadlock, etc. With respect to the OS concepts. Okay, so first let me discuss the meaning of deadlock, right? So this deadlock is a situation basically where a set of processes are blocked. Okay, so what is the main effect of deadlock is some set of messages will be blocked from the execution as each process is holding a resource and waiting for another resource acquired by some other process. Okay, so what basically this means is, so we have some set of processes, right? And these processes are blocked. Why? Because each process in the bunch of process is holding a, say, some particular resource, right? Along with the holding of a resource, the same process is also waiting for some other resource, and that particular some other resource is held by another process. Okay, like in this case, okay, so both the process cannot execute, and this represents a deadlock situation where any two process cannot proceed in their execution, right? And both will be in the blocked state, and this will be affecting the performance of the system. Okay, so the same definition can be better understood just by seeing this particular example, like where we are showing a simple road traffic deadlock situation. Okay, so you can assume like these ways are the highways, okay, or roads, okay, and these square boxes are representing, say, some vehicles. Okay, so we have this select so this pink color cars. Okay, so we have the movement of pink color car in this direction, and we have the yellow color vehicles moving from this direction, and we have the movement of yellow cars in this direction, and the movement of green cars, right, is in this direction. Okay, so as you can see here, no vehicle can move. Why? Because like if you observe the movement of this green cars means, so the flow of green cars is being blocked by the movement of this what is it, purple color cars. Okay, and the movement of this blue color cars are also blocked. Why? Because the movement here is blocked by the yellow color cars. Okay, like in total, you cannot expect the movement of cars, right, on the roads because all the roads are being blocked here. So this represents a deadlock situation. Okay, so now now let me have this deadlock in resource allocation. So we have the next concept in the syllabus. So by name deadlocks in resource allocation. So what do you mean by this? So the resource allocation in a system, okay, it can consist of basically three kinds of events. Okay, so resource allocation of a process. So what do you mean by this? So for example, like we know that so for any process to get executed, okay, like any process will be in need of so many resources, like say CPU time or printer or input device or output device, etc. So for successful execution of any process, we need to have the allocation of resources for the process. Okay, like in that sense, the resource allocation, like in a system, it will be of three kinds of like events are involved. So the first event is request for the resource. Okay, so until and unless the process is able to request for the resource, the OS will not be able to allocate the resource for the process, right? Hence, the first event, right, in the resource allocation in a system will be the request for the resource. Okay. Second one is actual allocation of the resource. So upon the request raised by the process, okay, And if the request, and if the resources are free, means the OS can go for the allocation of the resource to the particular process. And third event is the release of the resources. So this means what? Upon the use of the resources by the process has to release the resources so that the same resource can be allocated to the other process. Okay. So a process may utilize the resources in only the following sequence. So the sequence that must be followed in the resource allocation in any system will be like the first sequence should be the rise of the request. Okay. Second event should be the use of the request. Okay. And the third event should be the release of the resources. Okay. So this request is indicating what? Suppose if the request is not granted immediately, so then the requesting process must wait until it can acquire the resources. Okay. Suppose if the like resources are available, means the process or the requesting process can get the resources. Okay. Suppose if the say resources are not currently available, means the requesting process has to wait for some amount of time until the resources are freed. Okay. So next is the use or the actual allocation of the resource, right, or the use of resources. So where the process can operate on the resources. Okay. So upon the successful allocation of the resource to the process can operate or use the resources for its successful execution. Okay. And third event is the release of the resources. This indicates that the process releases the resources after using it. Okay. So once the execution of process is over, means that there is no point in keeping the resource right with the process. Hence, after the execution of the process can release the resources so that same resource can be allocated to the another process. Okay. Now, if the situation is okay that we have a set of processes that are blocked, why these processes are blocked? Because as each process is holding some resource, along with that the same process is also waiting for another resource. Okay. And this another resource is already held by some other process. Okay. Hence, in this case, you can expect a deadlock to be occurring in the system. Okay. Yeah. So we have a simple example here to express the concept of deadlocks. So what you can see here. So we have here two number of process P1 and P2, and we know that the symbol used to represent the process is a circle. Okay. And the resources will be indicated by the square. Okay. Remember this. Okay. Here we are dealing with the simple example where we are showing right how to analyze or how to say explain the concept of say like deadlock in any system. Okay. So we have a small diagram here where we're having two process P1 and P2 process, and we have two resources R1 and R2 resources. And like example for the resource can be a file or some sort of database or CPU time or a printer or a plotter, whatever it is. Okay. So what is the case here? So this P1 is holding the resource R2. So this P1 is holding so this P1 process is requesting for the resource R1. Okay. So why I'm saying it as requesting for resource R1, because you can see the arrow mark here. Okay. So the arrow mark is from the process and towards the resource. Okay. So this arrow mark is pointing from the process and towards the resource. Hence, this means that so the process P1 is requesting for the resource R1. So, but this resource R1 is already held by process P2. Okay. According to this particular arrow. So this resource R1 is already held by the process P2. Along with that, this process P2 is requesting for resource R2, but this resource R2 is already held by process P1. Okay. Yeah. The same thing written here. So this process P1 holds rise request for R1. Okay, so but this R1 is held by the process P2. Here it is. And third statement, R2, I mean, so this second process P2 is requesting for the resource R2. Here it is. Okay, second process P2 is requesting for the resource R2. So, but this resource R2 is held by the process P1. Okay, so the ultimate condition here is, so the P1 process cannot access R1. Why? Because R1 resource is already assigned to the process P2. Okay. Similarly, second process P2 cannot access the resource R2. Why? Because already like this R2 resource is been assigned to the process P1, right? Or the resource R2 is held by the process P1. Okay. Hence, both the process P1 and P2 are in the deadlock situation. Means both the process P1 and P2 are waiting for each other. Okay. So as to release the resources. Okay. So that like those resources can be accessed. Hence here both the process P1 and P2 are in the deadlock situation. Okay, so note that. So the process involved in the deadlock remains in the blocked state permanently. Okay, right. So this will be affecting the operating system performance, and this is like, I mean, like this deadlock condition affects the throughput as well as the resource efficiency. Okay. And in total, so the operation of OS becomes still halted. Why? Because in this case, both the process P1 and P2 cannot progress in their execution. Okay. Again, I repeat, in the diagram, here we are discussing the deadlock situation using one simple example. And in this, we have like two process P1 and P2, and we represent all the process using circles, and all the resources will be represented by a rectangle, right? Or a square box. Okay. And according to the edges, okay, like these arrows are called as edges, and these circles are called as vertex. Okay, right. So according to say this particular arrow mark, okay, so where the arrow mark is from the process and towards the resource, means this means that this process P1 is requesting for the resource R1. Okay, similarly, if the arrow mark is into the process, right, or towards the process, means this means that R2 resource is held by the here it is. Suppose if this arrow mark is select into the process here, like observe this means that R1 process is held by the process P2. Means R1 resource is assigned to the process P2. Okay, so can you make out the difference here, right? Like in this case, the arrow mark is from the process and towards the resource, right? And in second case, the arrow mark direction is from the resource and towards the process. Understand this. Okay, fine. So like now we have some events related to the resource allocation. Like in the last slide, so what we saw was the deadlock situation in the resource allocation concept. Now we are seeing the list of events. Okay, list of events related to the resource allocation. Right. So the first event is the request, second event is the allocation, and third one is the release of the resources. Okay. So for your understanding, okay, so what we have discussed here, okay, like the request for resource and allocation of resource, and after the use of resource, the process should be able to release the resource. Same thing is been written. Okay. So for your ease, so as to form some statements based upon the concept, so you can make the help of this particular thing, you can right, help it out. Okay. So we have the event here, right, along with the description, say for request and for allocation and for release. Okay, same thing what we have discussed here, okay, is been written in terms of statements. Okay, so you can simply read this. Okay. So next is the conditions for the resource deadlock. Okay, so what are the possible conditions for the resource deadlock? First condition is the non-shareable resources. Okay, so the resources cannot be shared. means a process needs exclusive, okay, exclusive access to a resource. Okay, so we can make this so we can make all the resource non-shareable. Okay, so that only one process will be given, okay, special access to only one resource. Okay, so the resources cannot be shared, and the process will be need of exclusive, okay, special access to the resource. Second condition is no preemption. Okay, no preemption. So this preemption basically means what? Preemption basically means that a particular process is stopped in the middle. Okay. So the simple meaning of this word preemption means that stopping. Okay. So no question of stopping a particular process, or say stopping a process in between or in the middle. Okay. Hence this no preemption means you cannot stop, right, the activities of a process in the middle or in between, right? A resource cannot be preempted from one process and allocated to the another process. So until a process is able to release the resource, the operating system or any entity as such cannot forcefully remove the resource from one process and allocate the same resource to the another process. Okay, no question of stopping the execution of a process right in the middle or in between. Okay, and third condition is hold and wait. Okay, so this hold and wait means what? A process is holding, right, at least one request, I mean one resource, and waiting for the other resource, right? Like as the image indicates, the so like any process is holding a resource. Along with that, same process is also waiting for another resource. Okay, a process continues to hold the resource allocated to it. Along with that, same process is also waiting for another resource. So like this condition we call it as hold and wait, right? So we have separate diagrams to explain no preemption, hold and wait, and circular waits. Okay, that will be discussed in the upcoming slides. No need to worry. And last condition is a circular wait. Okay, so a circular chain of hold and wait condition will be existing in the system. Okay, suppose if you see like this particular figure means, like here we have a circular wait. Why? Because the P1 process is requesting for R1, okay, and this R1 is already held by the process P2, right? Along with the holding of resource R1 by the process P2, same process P2 is requesting for the resource R2, and again the same resource R2 is held by the P1 process. Okay, so suppose if I start from the process P1 means, so you can have a loop here. Okay, so we have a circle here, means suppose if I start from process P1 means again I can come back to the same point, same process P1. Hence in this diagram you can expect a loop, you can expect a circle here. Okay, so this we call it as circular wait. Okay, so basically we have here these four conditions for the resource deadlock. Okay, like namely the first condition is a non-shareable resources. Second one is a no preemption, right? Again I repeat, so the word simply preemption means that stopping a particular process right in the middle, and the word no preemption means no question of stopping the activities of the process in the middle. Okay, and third condition is hold and wait, and fourth condition is circular wait, where we have a looping thing involved in the diagram. Okay, but again the loop means what? Suppose if I start from the process P1 means that you can come back to the same point P1. Okay, right? So you can expect a loop or a circular wait here. Okay, so the way the process P1 and P2 are waiting for their resource to be released. Okay, yeah. So next we have the four conditions required for deadlock to occur. So like in any system, okay, in any system, if we want to expect the deadlock to be happening means these four conditions must be able to exist in the system, then only deadlock will occur. Okay. So for deadlock to occur in any system, what we need is you will be expecting all these four conditions to be existing inside a system so that the system awesome set of process will be in the deadlock condition. And those four conditions are, so first condition is mutually exclusion. Okay, also called as mutual exclusion. ME stands for mutual exclusion. Second one is hold and wait condition. Third one is no preemption. Fourth one is circular wait. Okay, if and only if any system or some set of process is able to have all these four conditions, means then only the deadlock will be existing in the system. Okay, and those four conditions, I repeat again, those four necessary conditions, those four required conditions for deadlock to occur in any system are: first condition is mutual exclusion, second one is hold and wait, third is no preemption, fourth one is circular wait. Okay, so as the only last 1 minute is remaining,